Technology definitely is a wonderful way to kind of grab a kid's attention to get excited about, like, hey, I'm trying to show you something. So it's one thing to kind of like show a picture of a whale, but then to like see a video of it and be able to, kind of see it in action. Say if you don't live near the beach, it's a wonderful tool that the families could use. I guess my thoughts would be, when you're going to use the technology, just being interactive and engaging with the kids. It's so easy for the kids to kind of be sucked into the screen, but then kind of miss everything that's going on around them. But you can use this technology to kind of meet them where they're at, pause it, and ask questions.
Welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast, a resource for parents who are feeling outpaced and overwhelmed as they raise children in a tech world. As an educator, parent, and tech user, I want to equip parents with the tools, resources, and confidence they need to raise kids who love God and use tech. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast. My name is Nathan Sutherland, and this podcast is dedicated to helping families love God and use tech. Today, we have with us a special guest, Mr. Brandon Cole. Hey, welcome.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me.
And we get to talk today with someone who works in the field, specifically with young people as a developmental behavioral pediatrician, works with military families on the island of Oahu, and specifically works with young people with neurodevelopmental disorders, so ADHD, autism, and things of that ilk. And I'm excited because, that's a field that I don't have a lot of practice in. So we're excited to have Brandon here. Thanks for coming, man.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
So why don't you just take a quick minute? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure.
And then tell us about the work that you do.
There we go. Yeah. So born and raised in Georgia, wanted to be in medicine and loved working with kids. So started off with pediatrics. Found that I had a joy working with kids with special needs, in particular kids with autism, especially my wife. So she works as a behavioral therapist. So just being able to share that passion, being able to see how she's working with kids and just seeing lives transformed with that. So I went to specific training for developmental behavioral pediatrics, where I get to work with these families full time. So right now living with my family in Oahu. So we've been there this is our second time around. So 3.5 years. So a wife of 11 years, and I have 2 kids that are 7 and 5.
Yeah, and we've been blessed by being friends with Brandon and his wife and kiddos. Their kiddos are amazing and play with our older 2 just like hard. Like they were going today and they just like collapsed at around 4:30. And they're just like, do we have to go on? We're having so much fun, we can't move. So that's just been a personal blessing for us. So we love you guys and are so blessed. But in this conversation, what I'm excited for our listeners to get to hear is a bit of like the wisdom and training that you guys have that is so needed in this world. So as a former teacher and now as an individual working with families, I get to see families as they struggle through the season of COVID, where isolation has become a thing where we watch our kids get more isolated. And this isn't even because of necessarily choices. They're not like, well, I don't want to deal with the world. Their schools aren't functioning, or they're getting set home for 2 weeks at a time because they had a COVID exposure. They're dealing with just greater amounts of isolation. They don't have the friend groups, the sports, the outlets, the church things, right? Like they're just more isolated. And then we're getting pushed towards tech, either entertainment tech, so drool tech, as we call it in gospel tech, but entertainment tech, so social media, video games, shows, or they're just getting put on Zoom a lot. And I guess what I am hoping that our listeners can hear, what I would love to hear is, what impact have you seen on your patients, on their families, on what you're processing in your practice? What have you observed over the last 2 years related to this kind of duo of tech and isolation?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's been huge, seeing it not only affected with the kids that I'm able to work with, but just families as a whole. One of the biggest impacts of that I've seen is just like the isolation of families not really getting together, their families hanging out with other families, then their kids are missing out on those social opportunities. just having that communication, that network, that something special about being in person, that when you're there, you're present and that you're not being distracted by something else because you're right there in front of them. That's one of the biggest things that sometimes, have families, a lot of the times actually, families step into my office, it's like, hey, this is really one of the first couple of times that we've been out of the house, and out somewhere.
Like during this COVID season, you're saying?
Yes, even still.
Wow.
I work with a lot of kids from birth to like 18, 21 years of age. So, okay. Not only with socialization, but just like schooling and having to do with like online classes and having a lot of families pop up with, oh, now that we're paying more attention, that we see you struggling through this work, it's like maybe you have a specific learning disorder that we're starting to figure out. It's like, wow, you're having a really hard time with like attention and just like concentration. So in some aspects, this pandemic with families being able to have more of a being able to see their kids kind of work through things like, hey, you're actually really good at this. Or they see their kids kind of struggling in certain areas when in other areas they're doing well. So in some aspects, it's been helpful for me of just being able to help these kids out of like, oh, we're starting to know these things that maybe would have been missed before too. So,
that's an interesting. So because they're around their parents more, their parents are starting to pick up on these kind of idiosyncrasies or areas of potential struggle.
Yeah.
So let me kind of hang on that for just a moment before we progress to the rest of the question of, all right, so someone's listening to this and they either have a family member that like pops into their brain or just like a family friend. What is your encouragement to families who go, oh my goodness, like maybe it's not just like school is hard. Maybe it's like my child, like their brain isn't processing this information the same as everyone else. Like what encouragement and then what would you tell them to do with that kind of potential observation?
The mind is such a wonderful and complex thing. And I feel that we're made and we're geared to have certain strengths that we play on, but then also with some of those strengths, you notice some of the difficulties. So I guess the encouragement is that if you have difficulty with math, that sometimes it's just finding that different outlet of like, hey, you just look at the world a little bit differently, and the world needs that. So the encouragement is just, hey, you're having difficulty with it. Maybe there's a different angle that we can help you out. With that, or just kind of understanding where that child is coming from. My recommendations that, say, if you're in the public school system is, starting that conversation with your teacher of like, hey, are you noticing this? And getting in touch with having the conversation with the teacher, but then, hey, if we're starting to notice this pattern, then there's evaluations. There's different tiers of stepping it up of like, hey, how do you evaluate this to see, do we see a pattern? And that's something to look out for at home too. It's not just, hey, I have difficulty with attention when I'm doing one thing. It's like, hey, is this something that you see throughout the day? Like, start to pick up on patterns if they're there or not. That could be really helpful.
Yeah. And I just love and hearing you talk about your work and the young people and families you work with, like your heart for these children and for their potential is amazing. I know that as an educator, like I love hearing people have that heart. Sometimes when we hear ADHD, it is almost like we write people off, right? Like, oh, well, this person has ADHD, like that now that person is broken, or like, oh, this is autism. And there are individuals who, when their family member gets an autism diagnosis, it almost feels like a sentencing than a diagnosis, right? Like, oh, we've been like almost condemned to this life. But you speak often of how much hope and how amazing those individuals are with their ability to see the world. But it's not going to be the same way you and I necessarily see the world. And I think I love the way you just put that of like, yeah, like look for the consistent sequence of events. Like, is this happening all the time? And look at the hope that there is like this individual has a ton of potential. And that they can see. I think you said maybe in a conversation just the other day, but you were talking about like how they like will walk into a room and like what someone who has autism will see like when they walk into that room versus like what someone without autism will see when they walk into the room, like what their brain focuses on. And that like neither of them is better, but like they're unique and distinct. And if you don't understand that this is what another person is seeing, like you could misunderstand it.
Right.
Am I? Am I summarizing that carefully enough? Like, I don't want to too broadly brush it.
Yeah, but it's helpful to have those different perspectives as well. I mean, but when we talk like in the realm of neurodevelopmental disorders, like, I mean, when they talk about autism spectrum disorder, I mean, it is a spectrum, right? So I work with a lot of kids that are, it is more severe. It is difficult, where they have difficulty even with speech or communication, and that's where we try to meet the child where they're at and work on that bridge of communication to help us, to give us insight into, hey, what do you care about? Like, what do you find that's interesting, and find those passions that they have. Yeah. And then you start to notice some of those, like, oh, you're built, you're ticking this way. This is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then on that second part of the question, so the first is, hey, like, their families recognizing behavioral, like, idiosyncrasies or even like developmental issues that are coming up more because they're around their kids all the time going, wait a minute, what's happening here? The second side is the tech side. How have you seen that impact the families and the young people that you work with?
Yeah. It's different avenues. Like, I've seen it played different ways. I've seen where it's been an outlet where, say, maybe someone with higher functioning autism has always felt that kind of that difficulty with socialization, or they feel intimidated by like all the different sounds that are going on in the classroom, all the distractions. So like actually being able to have the outlet of like having a Zoom meeting, talking with the teacher, like now they're asking questions. So I've seen it open it up for some of those folks, but then I also see the other flip side of just the technology where the kids are at home, just kind of like locked into video games and not really having like an endpoint, or just, hey, I would like to go surfing. I live in Oahu, but hey, at this specific time, like we can't. So we're kind of, this is what we're doing.
So you see it coming up where we have this isolation, where there's mandated isolation, right? You can't go to this beach, or you can't be in this public space,
right.
Or they get fixated on a thing. So I guess to follow that question up of, what do you tell families when they come in and you have now a diagnosis of some behavioral or developmental situation occurring? Technology is potentially engaged in that, either exacerbating it or supporting it. What is your process when you talk to these families about how they should go about determining the use of tech?
Right. A lot of families that I work with, their kids are kind of like in the earlier stages. So I see a lot of kids that are 2, 3, 4, and 5. And technology definitely is a wonderful way to kind of grab a kid's attention, to get excited about, like, hey, I'm trying to show you something. So it's one thing to kind of like show a picture of a whale, but then to like see a video of it and be able to, kind of see it in action. Say if you don't live near the beach, it's a wonderful tool that the families could use. I guess my thoughts would be, when you're going to use the technology, just being interactive and engaging with the kids. It's so easy for the kids to kind of be sucked into the screen, but then kind of miss everything that's going on around them. But you can use this technology to kind of meet them where they're at, pause it, and ask questions. Or like, hey, did you notice this? Look at that. What would you do if you're in this situation? Like, you can use those moments as teaching opportunities. So, it's been put out by the American Academy of Pediatrics that, when you use the technology, for it to have its fullest effect of just like sinking in and making sense, or being able to generalize those skills, it's really like, how do you, it's having that parent there, having that someone there to give you context and showing you how to apply it, which is what's really helpful.
So we have the two different kinds here. So listeners, we'll just kind of lay this out right here to make sure everyone's on the same page. Tool tech is when we talk about technology that helps us create. Drool tech is technology that helps us consume. And the reason that's important is tool tech is always user-driven, and it operates at the pace of real life. So you using Microsoft Word is tool tech. There is no user design interface to get you to use Microsoft Word more than you need to finish a project. Like, you're going to finish a project and you're going to walk away. It doesn't send you notifications. It doesn't tell you about what your other friends are writing. Like, it is just there to be a tool. Drool Tech, however, is designed for engagement. So it now is going to set you goals. It's going to set you reminders. It's going to tell you about other people that are doing things probably better than you're doing. It's going to show you pictures of those individuals. And that's everything from the shows we watch to our social media to our video games, right? Those are all included in that. So in this case, it sounds like Tool Tech can be great with a wide range of young people, and specifically with children who are developing with something like ADHD or on the autism spectrum. It can be great when we're helping them create with it. And then Drool Tech can even be great, you said, but like using it as almost like a relational medium. Yeah. Like, hey, we have this thing, and now this is our experience together. Not an escape together, but like an actual conversation piece. We're going to watch the whale and stop it, and we're going to watch the show and like actually pause and like engage one another.
Yeah, it's kind of like a step up with, say, like books like the Berenstain Bears. Okay. Like it's all about social stories. It's all about, social stories, but you could do that with shows too. And the great thing about a lot of the tech that we have is just the ability to press the pause button and say, hey, one thing that a lot of people with autism have difficulty with is something called theory of mind, being able to put yourself into someone else's shoes, kind of understanding, hey, where are they coming from? What are they thinking in that situation? So even if you're watching a movie or a show, just taking a step back and be like, hey, why do you think that person did that? In what context? Like, what would you do if you're in this situation?
Yeah, that's good, man. Even if your kid is not processing theory of mind, like development, like my 6 and 8-year-old need to be asked that. Because, sometimes it just washes over you and you just take assumptions with it, right? My kids, by the way, were just reading Jack and the Beanstalk the other day. And they're like, what's the lesson? And it's like, be kind. We're like, no, let's talk again here. Like, this is a story about a little boy who steals and thieves and gets away with it and lives a perfect life. Like, what is this story telling us? And do we agree with that? Like, but just talking like what's going through is, it seems like a good thing for all of us to do. So in most cases, that sounds like that's positive. In cases where it's not, I guess first, what's your litmus for like when a family comes in? If what sets off your kind of alarm? They're like, man, tech might actually be part of the problem for this family.
Right. I would say in my field, when I hear about kind of kids on their own, not really engaging with other people, where they're just kind of just viewing, but then there's like no response. With kind of like the outside world of what's going around with them, and a lot of the people that I work with, like that's part of the difficulty that they have is just kind of recognizing the important things that are going on around them. So having something where they're kind of zoned into for say like 3 to 4 hours. So time, I guess, is kind of part of the litmus of like how much time are we spending towards this, and is this beneficial time? Or is this kind of like, hey, this is just something that I'm doing? Because a lot of families will, it's like, well, this just helps kind of like stress relieve. Right. They get really upset if they're not on it. And you can definitely use technology as, hey, you have this for like 10 minutes. I know that you just got home from school. This is a good way to kind of calm down, kind of re-equilibrate. But then just having those kind of stop times after, it's like, when this time is up, then we're going to do this. Yeah. But yeah, the red flags are more of like, hey, the majority of the time on if I'm on this, or just the not integrating it with other people around you, being able to share that. So it's like, hey, if you're watching a video, hey, what'd you learn from the video? Let's talk about it.
Yeah. Well, and you even you just mentioned your time. You mentioned like further isolation, behavioral and emotional changes that are tied to it, right? Like those are all huge and true, man, outside of it. So then what do you tell them for alternatives? Like, this is a problem. You can hear this is a problem. This kid's over fixating on this thing, and it's gone from a beneficial therapeutic impact where like this can kind of, like you mentioned, like recalibrate to home life or being in a new environment, to now this is like they need this to feel normal thing. Right. What do you encourage families to do?
I really like board games and just like games that the families can kind of sit down and do together. So one aspect of games is like you have this system, this rule set. So a lot of people that may have difficulties kind of picking up on the patterns of what's going on. It's like, I don't know what to do next. A lot of these games have it written down. So it gives this zone of comfort of like, I know what's going to happen next. And sometimes that just opens up the child of just being more comfortable of like, okay, I know what's going to happen next. So then that helps with the conversation, that helps with the communication. Or you have something that kind of brings you together, like a shared, like, hey, we're all doing this together, and that gives you something to be able to talk about.
Yeah, well, it seems like it would help develop what you mentioned, that you called it theory of mind, I believe. Like, does that help in that as well? Because you're now playing with people in real time.
What it does is it just gives you all of those different opportunities. And it's like, hey, you can have a failed opportunity. It's like, well, that didn't work out the way that I wanted it to. But then that's another bullet point in your life of like, hey, this happened this one time, this is what happened. But then it happened like 20 other different ways. So then when you're in a new situation, it's like, maybe it's like one of these 30 ways. Which one is it more like? Let me use that.
Yeah.
It's just those opportunities. And that's why I'm saying, when you're using the tech, when you're watching a show, those are all teachable moments that I guess I'm speaking specifically to say autism is like, hey, those are all those reference points that I can kind of go back to. Hey, I'm in this new situation that I've never seen before, but I've kind of worked through this and I've kind of thought about this in the past.
I mean, it makes my heart happy to hear board games because they have a soft spot in my heart. Yeah. So that's amazing. Yeah. But so cool to hear that like there have been benefits and even like just the increased opportunity of parents to be attentive to their kids. That is amazing. I guess, are there any words of encouragement? Or I guess I'd word it this way. If you could only tell our listeners one thing, as they're wrapping up a second year of COVID, some of our areas are actually doing quarantines and stuff again, like technology. Some schools can't have enough teachers and they're going back to at-home learning. Like we thought we were in the clear and now some of it's just imploding on us. If you could only tell us one thing, what one thing would you encourage or challenge us on? Given your field and work.
I would say just optimize those times that you're communicating and that you're interacting with the kid. And I would say that don't be discouraged when those times don't really work out the way that you foresaw them. So like say a board game, it's like, wow, that was really hard. Like maybe there's some rigidity of like, I thought this rule was this way. But it's being able to work through that self-regulation, being able to work through that just frustration tolerance. Right? But you're just building that connection. It's like, hey, buddy, this is difficult, but we're working through this.
Yeah.
So it's the time that you have is precious. And and that's the hard part about, just with COVID that just like the mental game that has been playing on people, and it's tough. And raising kids are tough. But it's worth it. And so I guess my piece of advice is, don't give up. Those times are precious. And even when you don't think that your kid is listening or that they're learning something, they're picking up on more than you would think.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and right before we started, I was like, hey, Brandon, what's a verse you do like at work that like just encourages you? And you very quickly gave me an answer. Would you share that with us? I think that'd be a great way to close this out.
Yeah. So Proverbs 17:22. So a joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. And I've seen that so true in my life, in my practice. It's true.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for your work with young people, with families. Man, I hope that listeners, that you are encouraged. Maybe you have a family member that you're recognizing some developmental complications as far as their learning and their ability to process and socialize. And for the rest of us, like this is still key. Like we still need a joyful heart. And we get that when we understand our place in the conversation of the gospel, when we understand that God loves us in our brokenness and that the path of righteousness isn't something we earn our way onto and then God picks us for his intergalactic kickball team, but instead he sees us in our brokenness, Romans 5:8 says, and sent his only son so that he would die in our place, rise again for our good and his glory, right? That's John 3:15 and 16. And now we're made sons of God. all of us, we get a full inheritance, the Holy Spirit, and out of that we get joy. We can love our kids where they're at. We can serve in hard situations, and darn it, we can even be joyful during another quarantine crackdown, not because we like it, but because we know a God who's good despite this. And my hope for all of you listening today is that this is encouraging, that you can look at where your tech life is, where your kid is, where your future is, and even when they don't line up with that goal you set for yourself a week and a half ago, they can still line up with the good God who has a plan for you and who is taking you even on this tech journey. So I hope this is encouraging to you. I hope it gives you an actionable step when using tech and looking at, man, is this okay or not? And I hope that you will join us next week as we continue this conversation about how we can love God and use tech.